My son called me at 1:13 in the morning sobbing that his wife was dying. She needed $50,000 for emergency surgery right now, or the hospital would let her die. I heard her in the background, gasping for air and whispering my name. I did what any father would hate to do. I said, "No." And I hung up. I thought I was teaching him a lesson about financial responsibility. I thought I was being a tough dad. I went back to sleep believing I had done the right thing. But when the police pounded on my front door at 7 the next morning, with a warrant in their hands, I realized my mistake was not refusing the money. My mistake was thinking I knew the whole story. Before I tell you how a midnight phone call turned into a criminal investigation that destroyed my family, tell me in the comments, have you ever had to say no to a family member in crisis? Hit like and subscribe if you believe truth is more important than money. The red numbers on my digital alarm clock burned into the darkness of my bedroom. 1:13 a.m. The phone on my nightstand was screaming a shrill mechanical ring that only brings bad news at this hour. Outside, the Chicago wind was rattling the window panes, a brutal February freeze that seeped through the walls of this old house. I fumbled for the receiver, my heart hammering against my ribs, expecting to hear a police officer or a coroner. Instead, I heard Lucas. My 40-year-old son was hyperventilating so hard I could barely understand him. "Dad, you have to help us. Oh God, Dad, please pick up." His voice was cracking, high-pitched and terrified. I sat up, rubbing the sleep from my eyes, trying to switch my brain from dream mode to crisis mode. Lucas, slow down. "What is going on?" I asked, my voice raspy. "It is Tiffany. She is hurt bad, Dad. Her appendix burst. We are at St. Jude Medical Center. The doctor says it is septic. Poison is leaking into her blood. If they do not operate in the next hour, she is going to die." I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. Tiffany was my daughter-in-law. She was a fragile woman, always complaining of some ailment, always seemingly on the verge of a collapse, but a burst appendix was serious business. "Okay," I said, reaching for my glasses. "I am coming down there. I will be there in 20 minutes. "No!" Lucas screamed, stopping me cold. "No, do not come here. There is no time." "The hospital, they checked our insurance and it lapsed, Dad. They said because it is an elective procedure, technically, they need a deposit. They need $50,000 in cash or a wire transfer confirmation before they wheel her into the OR. You have to send it. Please, Dad. I will pay you back. Just save her." I froze. My hand hovered over the lamp switch. I did not turn it on. I sat there in the dark, and the fear that had gripped me a second ago began to evaporate, replaced by something colder, something harder. I spent 35 years as an insurance fraud investigator for one of the biggest firms in Illinois. I have seen people set their own houses on fire for a payout. I have seen people fake their own deaths. But more importantly, I know the law. Specifically, I know the Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act, or EMTALA. "Lucas, listen to me," I said, keeping my voice steady, almost dangerously calm. "Put the doctor on the phone." "I cannot. He is prepping her," Lucas yelled. I said, "Put the doctor on the phone, Lucas. No emergency room in the United States of America can deny life-saving surgery because of an insurance lapse. If her appendix actually burst, that is a life-threatening emergency. They have to stabilize her. They bill you later. They do not demand $50,000 cash on the barrelhead at 1 in the morning. That is illegal." There was a pause on the other end of the line, a silence that lasted 2 seconds too long. Then I heard a sound. It was faint, but my hearing has always been sharp. It was a rhythmic thumping sound in the background, not the sterile, high-pitched beeping of a heart monitor. It sounded like a bass line, like music. And then a voice, Tiffany. She was moaning. "Oh, it hurts, Lucas. Tell him to hurry. It hurts so much." The moan sounded agonizing. To anyone else, it would have sounded heartbreaking. But I investigated bodily injury claims for 3 decades. I know the sound of true unbridled agony. True pain takes your breath away. It makes you unable to form coherent sentences. Tiffany's voice was too projected, too theatrical. And then I heard a sharp whisper muffled as if a hand was over the mouthpiece but not covered enough. Tell him 50 is not enough, ask for 60 just in case. The whisper was Tiffany. The woman who was supposedly dying of sepsis and drifting into a coma was doing math in the middle of her death rattle. My blood ran cold. Not from fear, but from anger. This was not a medical emergency. This was a shakedown. My son, my own flesh and blood, was calling me in the middle of the night to scam me. Or maybe he was the one being scammed, and he was too stupid to see it. Lucas, I said, my voice dropping an octave. I am going to ask you one more time. Who is the attending physician? What is his name? It is Dr. Roberts. Dad. Why are you doing this? Do you want her to die? She is screaming in pain. How can you be so cruel? You have the money sitting in your retirement account. I do, I replied. And that is where it is going to stay. Dad, no. I am not sending you $50,000. I am not sending you 50 cents. If she is really sick, the hospital will operate because they have to. If they refuse, you call the police and you sue them. But I suspect that if I drove down to St. Jude right now, I would not find you there. There was a gasp on the other end. Dad. I swear. Stop it, Lucas. Just stop. You are gambling again, aren't you? Or is it her? Did she run up the credit cards again? I told you last time I bailed you out that the bank of Dad is closed. Dad, please call me when she is out of surgery, I said. I hung up the phone. The click echoed in the silent room. My hand was shaking, not from the cold, but from the adrenaline of the confrontation. I sat there in the dark for a long time, staring at the shadows shifting across the ceiling. I waited for the phone to ring again. I waited for him to call back, to scream, to curse me out, to put a real doctor on the line to prove me wrong. But the phone stayed silent. I lay back down, Busson pulling the quilt up to my chin. I told myself I did the right thing. I told myself that this was tough love. Lucas was 40 years old. He needed to learn that he couldn't use panic as a weapon to raid my savings. He needed to stand up to that woman who was bleeding him dry. I closed my eyes, forcing my breathing to slow down. I was convinced I had just dodged a bullet. I was convinced I had won. But as sleep slowly started to drag me back under a nagging thought, pricked at the back of my brain, that background noise, that thumping bass line, it didn't sound like a hospital. It didn't sound like their house either. It sounded like a car. They were driving somewhere. And if they weren't at the hospital, where were they going at 1 a.m. in a freezing Chicago blizzard? And why did Lucas sound so truly, genuinely terrified? Tiffany was acting. I was sure of that. But Lucas, the fear in his voice was real. I pushed the thought away. He is just weak, I told myself. He is just scared of her. I rolled over and finally drifted into a restless, uneasy sleep. I had no idea that while I was sleeping, my son was making a choice that would end his life as he knew it. I had no idea that the next time I saw him, he would be in handcuffs. And I certainly didn't know that my refusal to pay was the first domino in a chain reaction that would expose a monster living in my family. The morning sun was about to bring something much darker than just the light of day. The morning sun hit the kitchen counter at exactly 7 o'clock. It was a pale winter light that offered no warmth, much like the feeling in my chest. I stood there in my robe watching the dark liquid drip into the glass pot of the coffee maker. The rhythmic hissing and gurgling was the only sound in the house. I had not slept since that phone call. I had spent the last 5 hours staring at the ceiling, rehearsing what I was going to say to Lucas. I had a speech prepared. It was a good speech. I was going to tell him that I loved him too much to let him be an idiot. I was going to tell him that financial blackmail is not how families operate. I was going to offer to pay for a financial advisor, maybe even marriage counseling, but not a cent for mysterious surgeries in the middle of the night. I felt righteous. I felt like the adult in the room. I took a sip of the black coffee, letting the bitterness wake up my tired brain. I was expecting Lucas to come over. I expected him to bang on the door, maybe with tears, maybe with Tiffany in the car, acting weak, trying to guilt me one last time. I was ready for a fight. But I was not ready for the front door to practically explode. 3 heavy, authoritative pounds shook the frame of the house. Boom, boom, boom. It was not the frantic knocking of a desperate son. It was the demand of someone who does not ask for permission. I frowned, setting my mug down on the granite counter with a little too much force. Coffee sloshed over the rim. My first thought was that Lucas had lost his mind completely. I thought maybe he had come over here to break the door down to physically fight me for the money. Anger flared up in my gut. I tightened the belt of my robe and marched down the hallway. I was ready to throw him out. I was ready to call the police on my own son if I had to. I unlocked the deadbolt and swung the door open, a reprimand already forming on my lips. The words died in my throat. It was not Lucas. Standing on my porch, breath puffing in the freezing air, were 2 uniformed officers and a man in a cheap gray suit who looked like he had slept in his car. I knew that look. I wore that look for 30 years. He was a detective. "Mr. Gerald Hawkins," the man in the suit asked. His voice was flat, professional, and utterly devoid of sympathy. "Yes," I said, my hand gripping the doorframe. My mind raced. Lucas must have called them. He must have told them I was endangering his wife. He must have spun some story about elder neglect or emotional abuse. The audacity of it made my face hot. "Is this about my son?" I asked, cutting him off. "Look, if he sent you here because I refused to pay for his wife's surgery, you can tell him that is a civil matter. I know the law. I am under no legal obligation to fund his bad decisions. This is a waste of taxpayer money." The detective stared at me. He did not blink. He did not look confused. He looked at me with a strange mixture of pity and contempt. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his inside jacket pocket. "This is a warrant to search the residence of Lucas Hawkins, but since he is currently in custody and listed you as his emergency contact and legal proxy, we are notifying you." Custody, I repeated the word. It felt heavy and foreign on my tongue. Custody for what? Did he cause a scene at the hospital? Did he threaten a doctor? The detective took a step closer. "Mr. Hawkins, your son was arrested at 2:15 this morning. He is currently being held at the 4th District Station. Arrested for what?" I demanded, my voice rising. "For yelling, for trespassing, for armed robbery," the detective said. The world stopped. The sounds of the morning traffic, the wind in the trees, the hum of my refrigerator, it all vanished. All I could hear was the blood rushing in my ears. "That is impossible," I whispered. "Lucas is a high school history teacher. He has never even had a speeding ticket. You have the wrong person." He was apprehended inside a CVS pharmacy 3 miles from here. The detective continued reading from his notebook, as if checking a grocery list. He assaulted the pharmacist. He claimed he had a weapon. He demanded all the OxyContin and opioids in the safe. We found him cowering in the back aisle when patrol units arrived. He was hysterical. My knees gave out. I didn't fall, but I had to lean heavily against the door. A robbery. A drug robbery. At 2 a.m, less than an hour after I hung up the phone. The timeline clicked into place like the tumblers of a lock. He called me at 1:13. I said no. He hung up, and 40 minutes later he was storming into a pharmacy. "He didn't do it for money," I said, my voice sounding hollow. "He did it for pills." "We need you to come down to the station," the detective said. "He is refusing to speak to a public defender. He keeps screaming for his father." I do not remember the drive to the station. I must have put on clothes. I must have locked my front door. I must have stopped at red lights. But my mind was completely blank. It was a white noise of shock. I had spent my entire career catching bad guys. I was the one who spotted the inconsistencies in the stories. I was the one who pointed the finger. I was never the one sitting on the other side of the glass. I was the respectable citizen. I was the good father who paid for college, who taught his son to shake hands firmly and look people in the eye. How did we get here? How did my son go from grading papers to robbing pharmacies in a single night? The police station smelled of stale floor wax and old sweat. It was a smell I used to associate with work, with justice. Now it smelled like failure. I walked through the double doors, and for the first time in my life, I felt the eyes of the officers on me, not as a colleague, but as a suspect's father. I felt small. I felt ashamed. Detective Kowalski. The man from my porch met me at the front desk. He led me back through the secure doors past the holding cells where drunks and petty thieves sat on metal benches. We stopped at an interrogation room. He is in a bad way, Kowalski warned me, his hand on the doorknob. He is claiming medical necessity. He is saying his wife is dying, and he had no choice. I took a deep breath, trying to summon the anger I had felt earlier in the kitchen. I wanted to be angry. Anger was safe. Anger was powerful. But all I felt was a crushing, suffocating sadness. Kowalski opened the door. Lucas was sitting at a metal table, handcuffed to a ring in the floor. He looked like a train wreck. His shirt was torn at the collar. His lip was split and swollen, crusted with dried blood. One of his eyes was already puffing shut, turning a sickly shade of purple. He was shaking violently, his teeth chattering as if he were freezing to death. When he saw me, he didn't look down in shame. He didn't apologize. He lunged at me. The chain on his handcuffs snapped taut, jerking him back into the chair with a metallic clang. But his eyes, wild and bloodshot, burned into mine. "This is your fault," he screamed, spittle flying from his mouth. "This is on you, Lucas! Calm down," I said, stepping back, horrified. "You killed her," he shrieked, struggling against the cuffs. "You killed her. I told you she was in pain. I told you she needed the meds. The hospital wouldn't give them to her. I had to get them. I had to do something." "You robbed a pharmacy, Lucas," I shouted back, my own control snapping. "You attacked a person. You are a criminal. I am a husband," he sobbed. His anger instantly collapsing into wretched tears. He slumped forward, banging his forehead against the cold metal table. "I am a husband who tried to save his wife because his father was too cheap to help. She is alone at home, Dad. She is dying in that bed right now because of you." I stared at him. I looked at my son, a man I had raised to be honest and gentle, and I saw a stranger. But worse than that, I saw something that chilled me to the bone. I saw conviction. He wasn't lying to protect himself. He believed it. He truly, 100% believed that his wife was dying, and that I was the villain. He had destroyed his life, thrown away his career and his freedom, based on a story that I knew, with every fiber of my being, was a lie. But standing there in that interrogation room, looking at the wreckage of my son, a terrifying thought crept into my mind. What if I was wrong? What if she really was sick? What if my cynicism had just cost my son his soul? No. I shook my head. No. The math didn't add up. The hospital refusal didn't add up. And the timing of the robbery didn't add up. "Where is she?" I asked quietly. "If she is dying, why isn't she here bailing you out? Why isn't she at the hospital?" "She can't move," Lucas wept, his voice muffled by the table. "She is at home. She is waiting for the medicine. And now she is going to die alone because you wouldn't listen." I looked at Detective Kowalski. "I want to see her," I said. "We can't let you leave," Kowalski said. "We need a statement." "I am not leaving town," I said, pulling out my wallet and slamming my old investigator's badge on the table. It was expired, but it still carried weight. I am going to bail him out. But first, I am going to see my daughter-in-law. If she is dying, I will call an ambulance myself. But if she isn't..." I didn't finish the sentence. I didn't have to. I looked back at Lucas, who was sobbing uncontrollably. I was going to find the truth. And God help whoever was lying to me. Here is the script for Part 3, written in English, optimized for AI voiceover, with a natural flow, dramatic pacing, and no headers or special formatting. The metal chair scraped against the concrete floor as I pulled it closer to my son. The sound was harsh, echoing off the cinder block walls of the interrogation room, but it was nothing compared to the noise inside my head. I looked at Lucas. He was a mess of tears and snot and dried blood. He looked like a child who had been beaten by the world, and for the first time in hours, I stopped looking at him like a suspect and started looking at him like a father. I needed to understand. I needed to know why a history teacher who cries during animal rescue commercials would walk into a pharmacy and threaten a stranger for a bottle of pills. "Lucas, look at me," I said, keeping my voice low and steady. "You said she is dying. You said I killed her. I need you to tell me exactly what is happening. No more lies, no more half-truths. If you want me to help you, you have to give me everything." Lucas took a shuddering breath. His hands were shaking so hard the handcuffs rattled against the table. He looked up at me with his one good eye, and the despair I saw there broke my heart. "It is stomach cancer, Dad," he whispered. "Stage 4. The words hit me like a physical blow. I sat back, the air leaving my lungs. Cancer. The word hung in the sterile air between us. "She was diagnosed 6 months ago," Lucas continued, his voice cracking. "It is aggressive. The doctors said there was nothing they could do. They gave her palliative care. But she didn't want you to know. She made me swear on my life I wouldn't tell you. Why?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Why would you hide this?" "Because she knows how you are," Lucas said, and for the first time there was no anger in his voice, only defeat. "She knows you look at her and see a gold digger. She knows you think she is weak. She wanted to be strong for you. She wanted to be the perfect daughter-in-law just for a little while longer. She didn't want your pity, Dad. She just wanted your respect." I felt a wave of nausea roll over me. I thought back to every family dinner in the last 6 months. I remembered Tiffany eating small portions, excusing herself to the restroom frequently. I had thought she was being dramatic or obsessed with her weight. I had judged her. I had rolled my eyes when she complained of fatigue. And all this time she was dying. Last night, Lucas said, tears spilling down his bruised cheeks again. The pain got bad. Worse than ever before. It was like her insides were on fire. She was screaming, "Dad." She was curling up on the floor and screaming for it to stop. We went to St. Jude because her specialist is there, but there was a mix-up with the insurance renewal. The policy lapsed last week. The administrator said because it was pain management and not life-saving resuscitation, they couldn't admit her without a deposit. They kicked us out. They kicked a dying woman out on the street in the snow. He sobbed, burying his face in his hands. We didn't have the meds. The pharmacy at the hospital was closed to outpatients. She was in the car, clawing at her stomach, begging me to kill her because it hurt so much. I panicked. I just wanted the pain to stop. I drove to the CVS. I didn't want to hurt anyone. I just wanted the OxyContin. I just wanted my wife to stop screaming. I closed my eyes. The image of my son, desperate and terrified, watching the woman he loved writhe in agony while his wealthy father slept soundly in a warm bed, was too much to bear. I had refused the money. I had called it a scam. I had stood on my high horse of legal knowledge and moral superiority while my family was drowning. I was the monster. I was the villain in this story. My professional skepticism, the tool that had served me so well for 30 years, had just blinded me to a tragedy happening in my own backyard. "I am so sorry, Lucas," I whispered. I reached across the table and covered his trembling hands with mine. I didn't know. I swear to God I didn't know. I need to get out of here, Lucas pleaded, gripping my hand. She is alone, Dad. If she dies while I am in here, I will never forgive myself. And I will never forgive you. I stood up. The chair scraped again, but this time with purpose. I wiped my face, pushing away the guilt, pushing away the shame. There would be time for self-loathing later. Right now, I had a job to do. You are not staying in here, I said firmly. I am going to fix this. I banged on the metal door. Detective Kowalski opened it, looking bored. I am posting bail, I said. Whatever the amount is, I am posting it now. It is set at 50,000, Kowalski said. The judge was not happy about the assault on the pharmacist. I don't care, I said. I am calling my bank. I am putting a lien on my house if I have to. Just process the paperwork. The next hour was a blur of phone calls and fax machines. I called my broker. I liquidated a savings bond. I leveraged the equity in the home I had paid off 10 years ago. I didn't hesitate. Every signature on every form was a penance. I was buying my son's freedom, but I was really trying to buy back my own conscience. I kept thinking about Tiffany alone in that house dying of cancer, thinking her father-in-law hated her enough to let her suffer. I felt sick. Finally, the paperwork was done. I stood at the intake desk waiting for them to release Lucas. The station was busy now, phones ringing, officers coming and going with coffee cups. I just wanted to get my son go to his house and get Tiffany to the best private hospital money could buy. I would spend every dime I had to make this right. The desk sergeant, a heavy-set man with a thick mustache, dropped a plastic property bag on the counter. It landed with a dull thud. Lucas Hawkins, he grunted. Sign here for his personal effects. Wallet, keys, belt shoelaces. I picked up the pen and scribbled my name. The sergeant grabbed the bag to hand it to me, but then he paused. He looked at the clear plastic bag, then back at me. Rough night for the kid, huh? The sergeant said, chewing on a toothpick. He kept talking about his sick wife. Said it was an emergency. Yes, I said, feeling the sting of shame again. It is a very complicated situation. Yeah, I bet the sergeant chuckled humorlessly. Must be a hell of a doctor he has got. I frowned. What do you mean? The sergeant tapped the plastic bag with his thick finger. I saw the brown leather of Lucas's wallet pressed against the side. Sticking out of it was the corner of a boarding pass. When we booked him, we inventoried the wallet, the sergeant said casually. Found a plane ticket tucked in the billfold. One way. First class. Departing tomorrow morning. I froze. My hand hovered over the bag. A plane ticket. Lucas hadn't mentioned a trip. He said they were broke. He said the insurance had lapsed. Where to? I asked, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. Was there a specialist in another city? Was he taking her to the Mayo Clinic or maybe somewhere in Europe for experimental treatment? The sergeant squinted at the computer screen. Let's see here. Flight 702, Chicago O'Hare to Grand Cayman. The words hung in the air like smoke. Grand Cayman, the Cayman Islands, a tropical paradise known for two things: offshore banking and tax evasion, not exactly a destination for advanced oncology. Why would a man with a dying wife and no insurance buy a first-class one-way ticket to the Caribbean for the next morning? The guilt that had been crushing my chest a moment ago suddenly lightened, replaced by a tiny, sharp prick of something else. Something familiar. It was the feeling I used to get when a claimant with a back injury forgot to limp for a split second. It was the itch of suspicion. Here he comes, the sergeant said, nodding toward the metal door. Lucas walked out, looking small and broken, holding his stomach. He saw me and rushed forward, burying his face in my shoulder, sobbing, "Thank you," over and over again. I hugged him back. I held my son tight. But over his shoulder, our eyes were locked on that plastic bag on the counter. The edges of the boarding pass were just visible. And for the first time since he told me about the cancer, I wondered if the tears soaking my shirt were tears of relief or tears of a man who almost got away with it. I didn't say a word. Oh, I just took the bag and I put it in my pocket. We had a dying woman to visit, and I had a lot of questions that I wasn't going to ask. Not yet. The drive from the police station to Lucas's house was the longest 20 minutes of my life. The silence in the car was heavy, suffocating, broken only by the rhythmic thumping of the windshield wipers pushing away the falling snow. Lucas sat in the passenger seat staring out the window, his hands still trembling from the trauma of the night. He looked like a ghost of the man I raised. Every few seconds he would check his phone, muttering that he hoped she was still breathing. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I wanted to shake him. I wanted to pull the car over and scream the truth into his face. I wanted to tell him about the plane ticket burning a hole in my pocket. But I stayed silent. I knew that if I confronted him now while he was this emotionally fragile, he would shut down. He would defend her. To catch a predator, you do not scare them off. You let them think they have won. You let them get comfortable. And then you close the trap. We pulled into the driveway of the small suburban ranch house that I had helped them buy 5 years ago. It used to be a cheerful place with flower boxes and a well-kept lawn. Now, even in the gray winter light, it looked neglected. The gutters were overflowing with frozen debris, and the blinds were drawn tight, sealing the house like a tomb. Lucas fumbled with his keys, his urgency returning. He practically fell through the front door shouting her name. Tiffany, I am here. I am home. I followed him inside, and the first thing that hit me was the smell. It was not the smell of sickness. It was the smell of chemicals. A sharp, overwhelming scent of pine cleaner and rubbing alcohol layered so thick it stung my nostrils. It was theatrical. It was the scent of someone trying too hard to convince the world that this was a sterile medical environment. The house was pitch black. Every curtain was drawn. The only light came from the glow of a humidifier in the corner of the living room, pumping a thick mist into the stale air. Lucas ran down the hallway to the master bedroom. I followed at a slower pace, my eyes scanning the shadows. I noticed things. I noticed a stack of unopened mail on the entry table, mostly final notices. I noticed that despite the medical crisis shown, there were no dirty dishes, no signs of chaotic living. Everything was staged. When I entered the bedroom, the scene was set for a tragedy. The room was stiflingly hot. A portable heater was humming in the corner. In the center of the king-sized bed, buried under a mountain of down comforters, lay Tiffany. She looked terrible. I had to give her credit for that. Her skin was a chalky, unnatural white, contrasting sharply with the dark circles painted under her eyes. Her lips were cracked and dry. She was breathing in shallow, raspy gasps, her hand clutching her stomach. When Lucas rushed to her side, falling to his knees, she flinched, as if his touch caused her physical pain. Lucas, she whispered, her voice a fragile thread. You came back. I thought they took you away. I thought I would never see you again. I am here, baby. Lucas sobbed, burying his face in the mattress. I tried to get the medicine. I tried so hard. I am so sorry. Tiffany reached out a trembling hand and stroked his hair. Her movements were slow, deliberate. She looked like a martyr in a Renaissance painting. You were so brave, she said, tears leaking from her eyes. My brave soldier. You shouldn't have done it. You shouldn't have risked your freedom for me. I am not worth it. You should have just let me go. I stood in the doorway watching this performance, and I felt a wave of nausea that had nothing to do with the smell of bleach. It was a masterclass in manipulation. She was not just playing the victim. She was playing the saint. By telling him he shouldn't have done it, she was absolving herself of guilt, while simultaneously reinforcing his loyalty. She was binding him to her with chains of guilt and adoration. I stepped into the room. The floorboards creaked under my weight. Tiffany's eyes snapped open. For a fraction of a second, before the mask of pain slipped back into place, I saw calculation. I saw fear. She hadn't expected the wallet, let alone the father-in-law she despised, to be standing in her bedroom. "Mr. Hawkins," she wheezed, pulling the blankets tighter around her chin. I didn't know you were coming. Look at me. I am a mess." I walked to the foot of the bed. I forced my face to soften. I forced my shoulders to slump. I needed to look like a defeated man. I needed to look like a father who had realized his mistake. "Tiffany," I said, my voice thick with fake emotion. "I owe you an apology." She blinked, surprised. "Lucas told me everything," I continued. "About the cancer. About the silence. I was wrong to doubt you. I was wrong to turn my back on family. I thought it was just another financial problem. I didn't know it was life or death." Tiffany let out a long, shuddering breath. She closed her eyes, a tear tracking through the white powder on her cheek. "It is okay," she whispered. "You were just protecting your son." "I understand." "I am going to make it right," I said. "I have already posted Lucas's bail, and I am going to cover the surgery, whatever it costs. 50,000, 100,000. I don't care. You are not going to die because of money." At the mention of the money, her eyes opened again. And this is where she made her mistake. She didn't look at Lucas. She didn't look at me with gratitude. Her eyes darted just for a split second to the corner of the room. Sitting on a velvet armchair, half hidden by a pile of clothes, was a handbag. It was a Hermes Birkin orange leather, brand new. I know because I investigated a theft ring involving luxury goods last year. That bag cost more than my car. Why would a dying woman who couldn't afford pain medication have a $20,000 handbag sitting ready by the door? And why, when I offered to save her life, was that bag the first thing she checked on? Because that is where the passport is, I thought. That is where the cash is going. "Thank you," Tiffany cried softly. "Thank you for saving us." I moved closer. I decided to push. I decided to test the limits of this script she had written. "We are not going to wait," I said, injecting a note of urgency into my voice. I made a phone call on the way over. I called Dr. Evans at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. He is the head of oncology. He is a personal friend. He is expecting us right now. He has a suite ready for you. The air in the room changed instantly. The gratitude vanished from Tiffany's face, replaced by pure, unadulterated panic. She tried to sit up, forgetting her pain for a moment. "What? No. I can't go there." "Why not?" I asked, stepping closer. "He is the best in the Midwest. I told him about your condition. He said he can operate today. I have an ambulance on the way. It will be here in 10 minutes. "No," Tiffany shrieked. Her voice lost its raspy quality. It was sharp and loud. She looked at Lucas, terrified. "Lucas, tell him I can't move. It hurts too much to move." "We have to move you to get you help," I reasoned, watching her squirm. "Northwestern has better equipment than St. Jude, and I am paying for it directly. You don't have to worry about deposits." "No," she yelled again, clutching the sheets. "I trust Dr. Roberts. He has been with me since the beginning. He knows my body. He knows the tumor. I can't start over with a new doctor now." "It is too late." Lucas looked confused. He looked from me to Tiffany. "Honey, Dad is right," Lucas said gently. "Northwestern is world-class. If Dr. Evans can see you—" I said no. Tiffany snapped at him, her eyes wide and manic. "Are you not listening to me? I need Dr. Roberts. He is the only one who can save me. If you move me, I will die. Do you hear me? I will die." She began to hyperventilate, gasping for air in a way that felt forced and desperate. It wasn't the panic of a dying woman. It was the panic of a cornered animal. She knew that a real oncologist would take one look at her charts, run one blood test, and the game would be over. She needed her fake doctor. She needed her controlled environment. I looked at her, really looked at her. I saw the sweat beading on her upper lip. I saw the way her eyes kept flicking back to that orange bag. She was terrified. But she wasn't afraid of death. She was afraid of the truth. "Okay," I said, raising my hands in surrender. "Okay. Calm down. If you want Dr. Roberts, we will get Dr. Roberts." She slumped back against the pillows, exhaling a breath that sounded like a hiss. "Just bring him here," she whispered, closing her eyes again. "He said he could do the procedure here if we had the money. He can set up a sterile field. It is safer than moving me." A home surgery for stage 4 stomach cancer. It was the most ridiculous thing I had ever heard. But I nodded. I pretended to buy it. "Fine," I said. "Text him. Tell him to come over. Tell him I have the cash." I turned and walked out of the room before the disgust on my face could give me away. I needed fresh air, and I needed to prepare for the arrival of the good doctor. I had a feeling Dr. Roberts wasn't going to be prepared for the kind of consultation I was about to give him. I sat in the corner of the bedroom in a stiff wooden chair, watching the performance of a lifetime unfold before me. The air was thick with the smell of lavender essential oils, now masking the earlier scent of bleach, but it did nothing to cover the stench of deception that was filling my lungs. Lucas was buzzing around the room like a nervous nursemaid, fluffing pillows, adjusting the humidifier, and constantly checking his watch for the arrival of the illustrious Dr. Roberts. I stayed quiet, playing the part of the chastised father, the man who had seen the error of his ways and was now just there to write the checks. But my eyes were sharp. My eyes were recording everything. I watched Tiffany closely. For a woman who was supposedly ravaged by stage 4 cancer, her movements were remarkably fluid when she thought I wasn't looking. She would shift her weight in bed, reaching for her water glass with a steady hand, only to let it tremble violently the moment she realized I was watching. But what interested me most was the ritual of the medicine. On the nightstand, arranged like sacred artifacts on a silver tray, were 6 amber prescription bottles. None of them had labels, no pharmacy names, no dosage instructions, no warning stickers, just smooth orange plastic. Lucas treated them with a reverence that was painful to watch. He would pick one up, wipe it with a cloth, and set it down gently as if it contained the Holy Grail. "Time for your midday dose, baby," Lucas whispered, checking his phone. "Dr. Roberts said we have to be precise to manage the breakthrough pain." He shook 2 white pills from one of the unlabeled bottles. Tiffany sat up, groaning theatrically, and reached for them. But then she did something strange. She didn't just pop them in her mouth. She turned her entire body away from me, facing the wall, huddled over her hand like a child hiding a piece of candy. I heard the gulp of water, and then she turned back, looking exhausted, sinking into the pillows with a sigh of relief. Why hide, I wondered. I have watched people take medicine for 30 years. People in pain don't care who sees them swallow a pill. They just want the relief, unless, of course, they aren't swallowing it at all, or unless they don't want you to see that the pill they are taking doesn't match the severity of their condition. I needed one of those pills. I needed to know what was inside those orange bottles that cost my son his freedom. But Lucas was guarding them like a pit bull. He stood by the bedside, stroking her hair, murmuring words of encouragement. "I needed him to leave the room, Lucas," I said, clearing my throat softly. "You look dehydrated, son. Your lips are chapped. Why don't you go get yourself a glass of water? I will sit with her." Lucas hesitated, looking at Tiffany. She gave him a weak nod, her eyes half closed. "Okay," he said. "I will be right back." Don't upset her, Dad." "I won't, I promised." As soon as Lucas left the room, the dynamic changed. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was heavy. Tiffany didn't look at me. She lay there breathing rhythmically, but her hands were clenched into fists on top of the duvet. She knew I was watching. She knew I was the threat. Suddenly, she let out a sharp, guttural cry. It was loud, designed to carry down the hallway to the kitchen. She arched her back, clutching her stomach, thrashing her legs under the heavy blankets. "It hurts," she screamed. "Oh God, it is tearing me apart. Lucas, help me." It was a good performance. A little over the top for my taste, but effective. I could hear Lucas dropping a glass in the kitchen and running toward us. This was my chance. I had seconds. I jumped up from my chair, feigning panic. I rushed to the bedside table, my hands shaking in mock terror. "Hold on, Tiffany," I shouted. "I will get your medicine." "Is it this one?" I grabbed the bottle Lucas had used earlier. I didn't open it. Instead, I let my elbow spasm, a clumsy, frantic movement of an old man who doesn't know what to do. My arm swept across the silver tray, sending the bottle flying. It hit the hardwood floor with a loud clatter, the cap popping off. Dozens of small white pills scattered across the dark wood, rolling under the bed, spinning into the corners of the room. "Oh no!" I cried out. "I am so sorry. I am so clumsy." I dropped to my knee instantly. I wasn't looking at Tiffany. I was scrambling on the floor, my hands moving fast. I scooped up a handful of pills to put back in the bottle, but with my left hand I palmed one single pill. I slid it into the cuff of my shirt in one smooth motion, a trick I learned from a card shark I arrested back in '98. Lucas burst into the room breathless. "What happened?" "Is she okay? I spilled them," I stammered, holding up the now half-empty bottle. She started screaming and I tried to help and I knocked them over. "I am so sorry, Lucas." Lucas dropped to his knees beside me, his face pale with panic. "Dad, we can't lose these. We can't get a refill until next week." These cost a fortune. We were both on the floor, crawling around like beggars, picking up the little white tablets. I handed him the ones I had collected, keeping my left hand tucked close to my side. "I think we got most of them," I said, standing up and dusting off my knees. Lucas was still frantic, checking under the nightstand, counting the pills in the bottle. But I wasn't looking at him. I looked at the bed. Tiffany had stopped screaming. In fact, she had stopped moving entirely. She was staring at me. Her head was turned on the pillow, and for the first time her face wasn't twisted in agony. It was completely still. Her eyes, usually wide with fake fear or clouded with fake pain, were narrowed into slits. They were laser-focused on my left shirt cuff. It was a look of pure, unadulterated malice. It was cold. It was calculating. It was the look of a predator who realizes the prey has teeth. There was no sickness in that gaze. There was only rage. She knew. She had seen the sleight of hand, or at least suspected it. For 1 second, just one heartbeat, we locked eyes. The mask was off. I saw the real Tiffany. The woman who had manipulated 3 husbands. The woman who had sent my son to rob a pharmacy. And she saw me. The investigator. The man who wasn't buying her ticket. Then, as Lucas stood up, the mask slammed back into place. Her face crumpled. A fresh sob tore from her throat. "Oh, it hurts," she wailed, reaching for Lucas. "Make it stop, baby. Make him leave. He is making it worse." Lucas turned to me, his eyes filled with accusation. "Dad, please. Just go wait in the living room. You are causing chaos." I nodded, backing away toward the door. "I am sorry," I mumbled. I will wait for the doctor." I turned and walked out of the room, my heart pounding against my ribs. I felt the small, hard pill pressing against my wrist inside my cuff. It was a tiny thing, no bigger than a breath mint. But as I walked down the dark hallway, away from the screaming woman and my desperate son, I knew that this tiny white circle was going to be the bullet that killed her lies. I just hoped I could fire it before she destroyed us completely. The drive to the lab was a blur of gray slush and red taillights. I did not turn on the radio. I did not call anyone. I just drove my hand occasionally drifting from the steering wheel to touch the spot on my chest where the stolen pill was tucked safely in my pocket. It felt heavy like a stone weighing down not just my jacket, but my entire conscience. I was heading to a small industrial park on the south side of Chicago, to a nondescript brick building that housed a private toxicology lab run by an old friend from my insurance days, Dr. Aris. We had worked together on dozens of cases back in the day, exposing fake whiplash injuries and staged slip and fall accidents. Aris was a man of science. He did not care about stories or tears. He cared about chemical compounds and molecular structures, and right now he was the only person on Earth whose opinion I trusted. When I arrived, the lab was quiet, humming with the low vibration of expensive machinery. The air smelled sterile, a mix of ozone and rubbing alcohol that cleared my head instantly. Aris was waiting for me. He saw the look on my face and didn't ask for pleasantries. He just held out a gloved hand. I reached into my pocket and retrieved the small white unmarked pill. It looked so innocent sitting in the palm of his latex glove. Just a compressed disc of powder. Yet this tiny object had the power to either exonerate my daughter-in-law or condemn her. "I need a full-spectrum analysis, Aris," I said, my voice sounding rough in the quiet room. "And I need it fast." Aris nodded, taking the pill over to his workstation. He used a mortar and pestle to crush it into a fine dust, then carefully transferred a sample into a small vial of solvent. I watched his every move, mesmerized. I found myself bargaining with God. I, a man who hadn't stepped foot in a church in 20 years, was standing there praying that the results would come back positive for opioids. Please, I thought, let it be morphine. Let it be OxyContin. Let it be fentanyl. It was a twisted thing to wish for. I was hoping that my daughter-in-law was truly in agony. I was hoping she was truly dependent on narcotics. Because if she was, then I was just a cynical old jerk who had misjudged a tragedy. I could live with being a jerk. I could apologize. I could write checks. I could grovel. But if that machine said something else, if it confirmed the dark, cold suspicion growing in my gut, then it meant my son was married to a monster. The mass spectrometer began to whir a high-pitched sound that drilled into my nerves. The waiting was agony. I paced the small room counting the floor tiles. 1, 2, 3, 4. Turn. 1, 2, 3, 4. Turn. I thought about Lucas. I thought about the sheer terror in his eyes when he talked about her pain. He wasn't acting. His trauma was real. If she was faking this, she wasn't just stealing his money. She was stealing his sanity. She was torturing him psychologically, using his empathy as a weapon against him. The printer chugged to life, breaking the silence. Aris walked over and tore off the sheet of paper. He adjusted his glasses, scanning the jagged peaks and valleys of the graph. He frowned. He tilted his head, looking closer. Then he looked at me. "Jerry," he said slowly. "Where did you get this? Is it oxy?" I asked, stepping forward. Aris shook his head. "No. There are no opioids in this sample. No narcotics of any kind." "Then what is it?" I demanded. "Is it a placebo?" "Is it sugar?" "No," Aris said, pointing to the highest peak on the graph. "It is a cocktail. A homemade compound. The primary active ingredient is bisacodyl." Bisacodyl. The name sounded familiar, but I couldn't place it. "What is that?" "It is a stimulant laxative, Jerry. A very potent one. And looking at the concentration here, this is a massive dose." I stared at him, my brain trying to process the information. A laxative. If you took this pill on an empty stomach. Aris continued, his voice clinical and detached. Within 30 minutes, you would experience severe abdominal cramping. Your intestines would spasm violently. It would feel like you were being stabbed in the gut. It would cause sweating, nausea, and intense, genuine pain. The room seemed to tilt on its axis. The screaming, the thrashing, the way she clutched her stomach and curled into a ball. It wasn't acting. She really was in pain, but it wasn't cancer. She was poisoning herself. She was deliberately inducing violent cramps to simulate the symptoms of a dying organ. And the secondary ingredient, I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Melatonin, Eris said. And a muscle relaxant usually found in over-the-counter sleep aids. High dosage. Enough to make an adult woman look lethargic, drowsy, weak. It would make her speech slur. It would make her look like she was fading away. I grabbed the counter to steady myself. It was brilliant. It was absolutely evil, but it was brilliant. She had engineered the perfect performance. The laxative provided the agony, the physical symptoms that Lucas could see and be terrified by. The sedative provided the dying look, the weakness that made her seem fragile. And by using unlabeled bottles, she made Lucas believe he was handling controlled substances, making him complicit in her narrative. My son didn't rob a pharmacy to save his wife from a tumor. He robbed a pharmacy to cure a stomach ache she gave herself. He was facing 10 years in prison for a theatrical prop. Jerry Eris asked softly, "Do you want a copy of this?" I nodded. "Yes. Give me the original. And sign it." I took the paper, my hands trembling with a rage so cold it felt like ice in my veins. The uncertainty was gone. The guilt was gone. The father who wanted to apologize was dead. In his place stood the investigator, the hunter. I thanked Eris and walked out into the biting wind of the parking lot. The city looked different now. It looked sharper. I got into my car and tossed the report onto the passenger seat. It was the smoking gun. But a gun is useless if you don't know where to aim it. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. The screen lit up, illuminating the dark interior of the car. It was a text from Lucas. "Dad, where are you? Dr. Roberts is 5 minutes away. Please tell me you have the cash. She is hurting so bad again. She needs the injection now. Please hurry." I stared at the message. She was hurting again because she probably took another one of those damn pills the moment I left the room, timing her next crisis for the doctor's arrival. She was ramping up the drama to ensure payment. I picked up the phone. I didn't type a reply. I just stared at the name, Dr. Roberts. The man who was coming to administer an injection to a woman who only needed a glass of water and a jail cell. I put the car in gear. The engine roared to life, a low growl that matched the feeling in my chest. I wasn't going back there to save her. I wasn't going back there to pay a doctor. I was going back to meet this so-called medical professional. I had a $50,000 payout in my trunk, but it wasn't cash. It was a folder of evidence and a burning desire for justice. I pulled out of the parking lot, tires spinning on the slick pavement. I was coming for them, and they had no idea what was about to walk through that door. The envelope in my inside jacket pocket felt heavy against my ribs. It was a thick, substantial weight that promised salvation. But if anyone had opened it, they would have found nothing but cut-up junk mail and old utility bills sandwiched between two single $20 bills. It was a prop, a decoy. I was walking back into my son's house not as a father, but as an undercover operative in a sting operation of my own making. I parked my car behind Lucas's sedan and took a moment to check my reflection in the rearview mirror. I practiced my expression. I let my shoulders slump. I let my mouth droop. I needed to look like a beaten man. I needed to look like a father who had been broken by guilt and was desperate to buy his way back into his family's good graces. I took a deep breath, inhaling the cold Chicago air, and stepped out of the car. The stage was set. When I walked through the front door, the atmosphere in the house had shifted from panic to a sort of vibrating anticipation. Lucas met me in the hallway. He looked exhausted, his eyes red and swollen, but there was a flicker of hope in his face that twisted a knife in my gut. He really believed I was the hero coming to save the day. He really believed the lie. "Did you get it?" Lucas whispered, grabbing my arm. "Is it all there?" I patted my chest pocket. "It is all here, son, every penny. Is he here yet, just as I asked?" Headlights swept across the front window. A car had pulled up to the curb, but I couldn't see it clearly through the closed blinds. "He is here," Lucas gasped. "Thank God. Dad, please be respectful. Dr. Roberts is doing us a huge favor coming out in this weather. He is risking his license treating her at home like this." I nodded solemnity. "I promise, Lucas. I just want to help." The doorbell rang. Lucas practically ran to answer it. He threw the door open, and there he stood. The savior. The illustrious Dr. Roberts. My first impression was that the casting director had done a decent job. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, wearing a pristine white lab coat that looked like it had just come out of the plastic wrapper. A stethoscope was draped casually around his neck. He wore wire-rimmed glasses that gave him an air of intelligence. But I spent 30 years looking at the details that other people miss, and as he stepped into the light of the hallway, the cracks in his costume began to show. "Dr. Roberts," Lucas said, shaking his hand vigorously. "Thank you for coming. This is my father, Gerald." Roberts turned to me. He extended a hand. I took it. His grip was firm, but his skin was rough, calloused. These were not the hands of a surgeon who performed delicate abdominal procedures. These were the hands of a man who worked with tools. As I held his hand a second longer than necessary, I looked down. His fingernails were short, but in the cuticles there were faint, stubborn traces of black grease that no amount of scrubbing could fully remove. And then I looked at his feet. He was wearing dress shoes, but they were cheap, scuffed leather caked with dried mud around the soles. Not fresh snow. "Old dried mud," Mr. Hawkins Roberts said. His voice was deep, practiced. "I understand we had a bit of a misunderstanding earlier. I am glad we could resolve it for the sake of the patient." "I am sorry, doctor," I said, forcing my voice to tremble. I was confused. I didn't realize how critical the situation was. "Please save my daughter-in-law." I reached into my jacket and pulled out the thick envelope. I held it out to him. It was the moment of truth. If he was a real doctor, he would be offended. He would tell me to pay the billing department later. He would focus on the patient. But Roberts didn't look at the patient. His eyes locked onto the envelope. He licked his lips. It was a micro-expression gone in an instant, but I saw it. Hunger. He took the envelope from my hand. He didn't check the contents. He didn't count it. He just weighed it in his hand, gave a satisfied nod, and shoved it deep into the pocket of his white coat. "Let's get to work," he said. We walked into the bedroom. Tiffany was moaning softly, her eyes fluttering open as we entered. When she saw the white coat, she let out a sob of relief. "Dr. Roberts," she whispered. "Please. It hurts." "I am here," Tiffany Roberts said, moving to the bedside with a swagger that felt more like a used car salesman than a physician. He opened a small black medical bag. I watched closely. It was empty except for a few syringes and a small vial of clear liquid. There were no monitors, no emergency crash kit, no blood pressure cuff, just the needle. "I am going to give you a cocktail to manage the pain and stabilize the tumor markers," Roberts announced, tapping the syringe. "It is going to burn a little, but then you will feel much better." He didn't swab her arm with alcohol. He didn't check for a vein. He just pinched the skin of her upper arm and jabbed the needle in. It was a sloppy injection. Tiffany flinched, but she didn't pull away. I watched the clear liquid disappear into her arm. Saline. Maybe water. Definitely not a $50,000 cancer treatment. Roberts pulled the needle out and tossed it into his bag. "There. That should take effect in a few minutes." He didn't have to wait a few minutes. The reaction was instantaneous. Tiffany let out a long, shuddering sigh. Her body, which had been tense and rigid, melted into the mattress. Her breathing slowed down. Her face relaxed. "Oh," she murmured. "Oh, that is better. The fire is gone." It was a miracle. A physiological impossibility. No narcotic works that fast. Even intravenous morphine takes time to circulate. This was pure theater. She was reacting to the cue, not the chemistry. Lucas was crying again, holding her hand. "Thank you, doctor. Thank you so much. You saved her." Roberts patted Lucas on the shoulder. "She needs rest now. Absolute quiet. The medicine needs to bind to the cells. I will come back tomorrow to check on her." He turned to leave, eager to get away with his envelope of paper scraps. He thought he had just made the easiest score of his life. He thought he was walking out with a retirement fund. "I will walk you out, doctor," I said. Roberts stiffened. "Oh, that is not necessary. I can find my way." "I insist," I said, placing a hand on his back. It was a firm touch, steering him. "I want to thank you properly." I guided him down the hallway past the kitchen, where my son was weeping with relief, past the living room, where the shadows hid the truth. We stepped out into the cold night air. The wind had picked up, biting at our faces. Roberts walked quickly toward the curb, his head down. He wanted to get into his car and count his money. He wanted to celebrate. I stopped on the porch and watched him go. He didn't walk toward a Mercedes or a BMW. He didn't even walk toward a sensible, reliable sedan. He walked toward a rusted, dented Ford Taurus that was at least 15 years old. The bumper was held on with duct tape. The muffler was hanging low, scraping the asphalt. He beeped the lock and opened the door. The interior light flickered on. The back seat was piled high with fast food wrappers and laundry. And spilling out of the center console was an ashtray overflowing with cheap cigarette butts. I stood there in the darkness, watching the so-called top oncologist in Chicago squeeze himself into a car that smelled like failure. He started the engine. It sputtered and coughed before roaring to life with a noise that sounded like a dying lawnmower. "Dr. Roberts," I called out. He rolled down the window, looking annoyed. "What drives safe?" I said. "The roads are slippery." He grunted and peeled away his taillights, disappearing into the gloom. I watched him go, a cold smile touching my lips for the first time that day. He had the envelope. He had the confidence. But he didn't know that I had his license plate number memorized. And he didn't know that the envelope he was so eager to open was going to be the evidence that put him behind bars. I turned back to the house. The trap was sprung. Now it was time to close it. I waited until the taillights of the rusted Ford Taurus turned the corner at the end of the block before I put my own car into gear. I didn't turn on my headlights immediately. I let the street lamps guide me, moving like a shadow through the suburban slush. Following someone is an art form I learned 30 years ago, and like riding a bike, the muscle memory never really fades. You don't look at the car directly. You look through the car in front of you. You anticipate the turns. You stay far enough back to be invisible, but close enough to never lose the kill. Dr. Roberts, or whatever his real name was not a careful driver. He drove with the reckless arrogance of a man who thinks he has just gotten away with the perfect crime. He blew through stop signs. He swerved around snowplows. He was in a hurry to celebrate. I followed him out of the quiet, manicured streets of the suburbs and onto the highway heading south. The scenery changed rapidly. The detached homes with 2 car garages gave way to strip malls, then to industrial warehouses, and finally to the crumbling brick tenements of the South Side. This was not where doctors lived. This was not where they went to unwind after a long surgery. This was the part of Chicago where dreams went to die and where people like Roberts went to hide. He pulled into the parking lot of a place called the Broken Spoke. It was a dive bar in the truest sense of the word, a squat, concrete bunker with a neon sign that flickered ominously, the letter O burned out, so it just read, the Broken SPKI. The parking lot was full of potholes filled with black ice. Roberts parked his heap next to a dumpster, killed the engine, and hopped out. Even from 50 yards away, I could see the change in his posture. The stoic, professional demeanor of the oncologist was gone. He was practically skipping toward the entrance, digging into his pocket to touch the envelope I had given him. I parked across the street in the shadows of a closed auto body shop. I reached into my glove box and pulled out the one thing I hadn't touched in nearly a decade. My snub-nosed .38 special. It was cold and heavy in my hand. I checked the chamber. It was loaded. I didn't intend to use it. I wasn't a vigilante, but I was walking into a den of wolves to confront a con artist, and at 72 years old, I wasn't going to rely on my fists. I tucked the gun into the waistband of my trousers, buttoned my coat, and stepped out into the wind. The bar smelled of stale beer sawdust and decades of regret. It was dark, the only light coming from the glowing beer signs and a few hanging bulbs over the pool tables. The jukebox was playing a low, mournful country song. I scanned the room. It didn't take long to find him. Roberts was sitting in a booth in the back corner, but he wasn't alone. He was with a woman who looked like she had lived a hard life and a man with tattoos climbing up his neck. And Roberts. Well, the transformation was complete. The pristine white lab coat was balled up on the sticky bench beside him. He was wearing a stained undershirt now. He had a pitcher of cheap beer in front of him and a shot of whiskey in his hand. He was laughing, a loud braying sound that grated on my nerves. I moved closer, stepping softly on the sawdust-covered floor. I wanted to hear him. I wanted to hear the confession before I delivered the verdict. "Easy money, baby," I heard him say, slamming the shot glass down. "Easiest grand I ever made." The old man was shaking like a leaf. "Oh, doctor, please save her," he mocked, pitching his voice high and trembling to imitate me. It was pathetic. I poked her with a little saline, and she acted like I just gave her the golden ticket. The tattooed man laughed. "Did you check the cash?" "Checked it." Roberts scoffed. "It is thick. I haven't opened it yet, wanted to save the surprise for us. But it feels like 20, maybe 30 large. Tonight, drinks are on the doctor." He reached for the envelope, which was sitting in the center of the table, right next to a basket of greasy chicken wings. I stepped out of the shadows. "I wouldn't open that if I were you," I said. My voice was low, barely louder than the hum of the refrigerator behind the bar, but it cut through their laughter like a razor blade. Roberts froze. His hand hovered over the envelope. He looked up, squinting through the gloom. When his eyes adjusted and he recognized me, the color drained from his face so fast I thought he might faint. It was a beautiful thing to watch. The arrogance evaporated, replaced by the primal fear of a prey animal that realizes the hunter has followed it into its burrow. Mr. Hawkins," he stammered. His voice cracked. This isn't what it looks like. I was just stopping for a meal before heading back to the hospital." I didn't say a word. I just stared at him. I walked to the booth. The tattooed man started to stand up, his hand going to his belt. "Hey, old man, you got a problem," he growled. I didn't look at him. I kept my eyes locked on Roberts. I unbuttoned my coat. I reached into my waistband and pulled out the revolver. I didn't point it at anyone. I didn't wave it around. I simply placed it on the table with a heavy metallic thud right on top of the envelope. The tattooed man sat back down slowly. The woman covered her mouth. The bar went very quiet. "Sit down, Roberts," I said. He sank back into the booth, his eyes glued to the gun. "You are going to tell me exactly who you are," I said, sliding into the booth opposite him. "And you are going to do it before I finish counting to 3. Or I am going to make a citizen's arrest right here, and I promise you with your record, whatever it is, you won't see sunlight for a very long time." 1. "I am an actor," he blurted out. "I am just an actor. My name is Steve. Steve Miller. Please don't shoot me," I leaned forward. "An actor. So you are not a doctor. You have no medical training." I took a CPR class at the YMCA once he squeaked. That is it. I do community theater. She found me on a casting website. Backstage Chicago. The ad was for a medical role play for a private client. I thought it was, a kink thing. I didn't know it was a scam until I got there. He was talking fast, desperate to distance himself from the fraud. She pays me $500 a visit, he continued, sweating profusely. She provides the coat, the stethoscope, the script. She tells me exactly what to say. Say tumor markers. Say palliative care. I just read the lines and the injection I asked. Water. Just tap water. I boiled it first. I swear I didn't want to give her an infection. I looked at this pathetic excuse for a human being. He wasn't a mastermind. He was just a gig worker hired to play a part in a tragedy. What about the robbery, I asked. What robbery? He looked genuinely confused. The pharmacy, I said. Last night. My son robbed a pharmacy to get drugs for her because you weren't there. Did you tell him to do that? Steve's mouth dropped open. Robbed a pharmacy? No way. I wasn't even working last night. She didn't call me until this morning. I don't know anything about a robbery. Dude, I am just an actor. I pretend to be a doctor, I take my $500 and I leave. I don't get involved in felonies. He was telling the truth. The fear in his eyes was authentic. He was a small-time grifter, a bottom feeder. He had no idea that his little role play had pushed a desperate husband to commit armed robbery. Tiffany hadn't told him. She kept her pawns separated. I reached out and took the envelope back from under the gun. I picked up the pistol and tucked it back into my coat. Steve, I said, standing up, you are going to do one more performance for me. The performance of a lifetime. Anything, he gasped. Anything you want. You are going to come back to the house with me tomorrow, I said. And you are going to tell my son exactly what you just told me. I can't. She will kill me. She knows people. I leaned down close to his ear. She knows people, Steve. I know the Chicago Police Department. I know the district attorney. And right now I am the only thing standing between you and an accessory to fraud charge. So you have a choice. You can deal with her, or you can deal with me. Steve swallowed hard. He looked at the gun in my waistband. He looked at the empty envelope in my hand. What time? He whispered. I checked my watch. Be ready at 9 a.m. and bring the coat. You are going to need it for the curtain call. I turned and walked out of the bar, leaving Dr. Roberts shivering in his undershirt. I had the confession. I had the fake doctor. Now all I needed was the final piece of the puzzle. I needed to know exactly who Jessica Barnes really was and why she needed a one-way ticket to the Cayman Islands. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Detective Kowalski. I answered it as I stepped into the snow. Jerry Kowalski said, his voice urgent. We got the file on the fingerprint. You were right. It is worse than we thought. You need to get back to the station. Now. I looked up at the night sky. The snow was falling harder, covering the grime of the city in a blanket of white. It was time to end this. I am on my way, I said. And Kowalski, a warrant ready. We are going to have a full house tomorrow. The snow was falling harder now, turning the streets of Chicago into a blurred canvas of white and gray. I sat in my car outside the precinct, the engine idling to keep the heater running, but the cold I felt had nothing to do with the weather. It was a deep, marrow, chilling freeze that settled in my bones whenever I knew I was about to look into the abyss. I had called Detective Kowalski immediately after leaving the bar. I told him I had something that didn't belong to me. A water glass. Specifically a crystal tumbler that Tiffany had used to swallow her fake pills earlier that afternoon. When Lucas wasn't looking, I had wrapped it in a handkerchief and slipped it into my coat pocket. At the time, I felt paranoid. Now, sitting here waiting for the lab tech to run the prints through the national database, I felt like I was the only sane person left in my family. I watched the precinct door counting the seconds. 1001. 1002. I thought about Lucas back at the house, probably holding her hand, apologizing for not having the money yet, unaware that he was sleeping next to a viper. The phone in my hand buzzed, startling me. It wasn't a text. It was a call from Kowalski. "Come inside, Jerry," he said. His voice was different, tighter. "You need to see this." I walked through the bullpen, ignoring the stares of the night shift officers. Kowalski was standing at his desk, staring at a computer monitor, as if it were a window into hell. He didn't look up when I approached. He just pointed at the screen. "We got a hit," he said. "And you were right. Her name is not Tiffany." I looked at the mugshot on the screen. It was younger, with less makeup and darker hair, but the eyes were the same. Cold, calculating, predatory. "Meet Jessica Barnes," Kowalski said, scrolling down the rap sheet. "And let me tell you, Jerry, your daughter-in-law is not just a scammer. She is a black widow." I leaned in, reading the text that scrolled past. It was a dossier of destruction that spanned 3 states and 10 years. "She started in Ohio," Kowalski explained, tapping the screen. 10 years ago. She was married to a man named Thomas Reed, a small business owner, a good guy by all accounts. 6 months into the marriage, Jessica developed a mysterious neurological condition. She needed treatments that insurance wouldn't cover. Thomas liquidated his business. He sold his parents' farm. He spent every dime he had trying to save her. And then I asked, dreading the answer. "And then when the money ran out, she miraculously went into remission," Kowalski said grimly. "But Thomas was ruined. The shame was too much for him. He was found in his garage with the engine running. Suicide." Jessica played the grieving widow for about a month, collected a small life insurance policy that he had left, and then vanished. I felt a lump form in my throat. I thought of Lucas sobbing in the interrogation room, saying he wanted to die if he couldn't save her. She had done this before. This was her script. She resurfaced 2 years later in Florida, Kowalski continued. New name, new hair color. This time she married a banker named David Miller. Same story. A rare autoimmune disease, expensive experimental treatments. But David didn't sell his assets. He embezzled. He stole $2 million from his client's accounts to pay for her doctors. "Where is he now?" I asked. "Serving 15 years in a federal penitentiary," Kowalski said. And get this. The day he was arrested, Jessica filed for annulment. She claimed she had no idea where the money came from. She played the victim. She walked away clean with a suitcase full of cash that the feds never recovered. "That is Lucas," I whispered. "She is doing the exact same thing to Lucas. She pushed him to rob that pharmacy. She is turning my son into a criminal so she can walk away with the loot." "It gets worse," Jerry, Kowalski said. He clicked to a third file, the most recent one. Texas, 3 years ago. A rancher named Samuel West. Older guy, wealthy. He married a sweet young woman named Veronica. "Guess who Jessica?" I said. "Samuel didn't commit a crime and he didn't commit suicide," Kowalski said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "He just disappeared. One day he went out to check the fence line and never came back. No body, no weapon, just a missing person report filed by his loving wife who claimed he had been suffering from dementia. She inherited the estate. She sold it for cash 2 weeks later and left the state. The Texas Rangers are still looking for her. They want to talk to her about the dirt that was disturbed near the barn, but they never had enough evidence to dig." I stared at the screen, my hands gripping the edge of the desk until my knuckles turned white. Suicide. Prison. Missing presumed dead. This wasn't just fraud. This was a slaughter. She moved from man to man like a parasite, draining them of their money, their dignity, and finally, their lives. And now she was in my son's house. She was in his bed. She is escalating, I said, my voice trembling with rage. She used to take years. Now she is doing it in months. She is getting sloppy, or she is getting greedy. She is getting ready to run, Kowalski said. He picked up a piece of paper from his printer. We ran a check on flight manifests like you asked. We flagged the name Jessica Barnes, but she is too smart for that. However, we flagged the passport number associated with her alias Tiffany. And she has a reservation on a private charter leaving for Grand Cayman tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock, Kowalski said. But it is not a round trip, and it is not for 2 people. I looked at him. Just one ticket, just one, Kowalski confirmed. She is leaving Lucas behind. She is going to take your $50,000 or whatever she can squeeze out of you tonight, and she is going to disappear. And Lucas. He will be left holding the bag for the robbery. He will go to prison just like the guy in Florida, and she will be sipping Mai Tais on a beach with a new name. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. It was worse than I thought. She wasn't just planning to leave. She was planning to destroy him completely. If she left tomorrow, Lucas would take the fall for everything. He would be the desperate drug addict who robbed a store, and she would be the poor sick wife who knew nothing about it. We have to arrest her, I said. We have to go there right now. We can't, Kowalski said, shaking his head. Not yet. Being a bad wife isn't a crime. We need proof of the fraud. We need to catch her in the act of taking the money under false pretenses. If we go in now, she will lawyer up. She will claim the medical condition is real, and it will take months of subpoenas to prove she is lying. By then, she will be out on bail and gone. So what do we do? I asked. You have to finish the play, Jerry, Kowalski said, looking me dead in the eye. You have to make the transaction. You have to hand her the money. Once she takes it, once she confirms that the money is for a medical procedure that she knows she doesn't need, that is theft by deception. That is fraud. And combined with the pills you tested and the testimony from the fake doctor, we can nail her. But she has to take the bait. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was nearly midnight. The flight was in 10 hours. The clock was ticking. She is desperate, I said. She is pushing for the money tonight because she knows she is leaving tomorrow. That is why she hired the actor. That is why she is ramping up the pain. She is trying to cash out. Then go give her what she wants, Kowalski said. Give her the money, and we will be right behind you. I nodded, grabbing my coat. I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. It was the calm of a soldier before the battle. I knew who she was now. She wasn't a ghost. She wasn't a tragedy. She was a criminal named Jessica, and she had made the mistake of picking a fight with the wrong family. I am going back, I said. Get your team ready. When I open that briefcase, I want you to kick the door down. I will be listening on the wire, Kowalski promised. Don't let her spook you, Jerry. She is dangerous. I know, I said, touching the pocket where I kept the picture of Lucas as a boy. But so am I. I walked out of the station and back into the snow. The city felt darker now, the shadows longer. I drove toward the house where my son was sleeping next to a black widow, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't driving to save him from the world. I was driving to save him from the person he loved most. The endgame had begun. The moment I stepped back inside my son's house, the atmosphere had shifted from a funeral wake to a frantic evacuation. The silence of the sick room was gone, replaced by the sound of zippers tearing open and closet doors banging against walls. Lucas was running back and forth from the bedroom to the living room, his arms full of clothes, throwing them haphazardly into open suitcases scattered across the floor. He looked like a man whose house was on fire, and in a way it was. He didn't even look at me when I entered. He was muttering to himself, a stream of consciousness fueled by panic and adrenaline. Passport, charger, meds, warm coat. Where is her warm coat? I stood in the hallway, watching the chaos. It was the frantic energy of a getaway. Tiffany wasn't planning on just leaving for a treatment. She was scrubbing the scene. She was erasing herself from this house before the walls closed in. I walked into the bedroom. Tiffany was sitting on the edge of the bed. For a woman who was supposedly too weak to move an hour ago, she was remarkably upright. She was barking orders at Lucas, pointing at the dresser, pointing at the bathroom. When she saw me, her face shifted instantly. The commander vanished and the martyr returned. She slumped slightly, putting a hand to her forehead. "Jerry," she gasped. "Thank God you are back. Everything has changed." I kept my face neutral. I kept my hands in my pockets, gripping the keys to my car. "What happened?" I asked. "Where is Dr. Roberts?" "He just left," she said, breathless. "He got a call from a colleague in Zurich. There is a spot open at the clinic, a cancellation. But we have to be there by tomorrow afternoon. If we miss this window, I miss the treatment. And Dr. Roberts says, he says I won't last another week without it." "Switzerland," I repeated. The lie was getting bigger. First it was a local surgery, now it was an international flight. She was improvising, using the pressure of time to crush any questions I might have. "There is a medical transport jet waiting at O'Hare," Lucas shouted from the closet, emerging with a handful of winter scarves. "It leaves at 4 a.m. We have to go now." I looked at Tiffany. A private medical jet to Switzerland would cost a fortune. It was the perfect excuse to drain a bank account dry. "How much?" I asked. I didn't beat around the bush. I went straight to the only thing that mattered to her. She looked down at her hands, feigning shame. "It is expensive, Jerry. The flight alone is $80,000. The clinic requires a deposit of another $120,000 before they will even let me in the door." $200,000, I said. My voice was flat. I know she sobbed, a single tear rolling down her cheek. "It is too much. I told Lucas we shouldn't ask you. I told him I should just stay here and accept my fate. But he wouldn't listen." I looked at Lucas. He dropped the scarves and ran to her side, falling to his knees. He grabbed her hands and kissed them desperately. "Don't say that," he cried. "Don't you ever say that. I will sell everything. I will work for the rest of my life. I don't care if we live in a cardboard box, as long as you are alive." He turned to me, his eyes wild and pleading. "Dad, please. I know it is a lot. I know I have messed up, but this is her life. You have the money. I know you do. You said you sold the stocks. Please, I am begging you. I will sign whatever you want. I will give you the deed to this house. Just save her." It was the most painful thing I have ever watched. My son was offering to sell his soul to the devil, and he was thanking her for the receipt. He was willing to bankrupt himself, to go to prison, to lose his inheritance, all for a woman who was looking at him, not with love, but with the cold calculation of a butcher eyeing a side of beef. She didn't love him. She didn't even like him. He was just a credit card with a heartbeat. I took a deep breath. I had to sell this. I had to make her believe that I was just another foolish old man falling for her trap. $200,000, I said, rubbing my chin. That is a lot of money to move around in the middle of the night. "I can't take a check," Tiffany said quickly. Her eyes were sharp now. "International banks, the clearing times are too long. They need a wire transfer confirmation or cash. They prefer cash for the pilot." Of course they do, I thought. Cash is untraceable. Cash fits in a carry-on bag. Cash buys a new life in the Cayman Islands. "I can't wire it," I said, shaking my head. "The banks are closed. My online limit is only $10,000 a day." Tiffany's face fell. The panic that flashed in her eyes was real this time. If she couldn't get the money tonight, her plan was ruined. She looked at the clock. "Then what do we do?" she demanded, her voice rising. "We can't wait until the banks open. The plane leaves in 4 hours." Lucas looked like he was about to vomit. He grabbed his hair, pulling at it. We are going to miss it. Oh God. We are going to miss it. I waited a beat. I let the silence stretch, letting their desperation peak. I didn't say I couldn't pay, I said slowly. I said I couldn't wire it. They both froze. Tiffany looked at me, her breath caught in her throat. I realized this afternoon that the situation was critical. I lied. I called my broker before he closed. I had him liquidate my entire portfolio. But I didn't put it in the bank. I don't trust banks with that kind of liquidity during a crisis. So where is it? Tiffany asked. She actually leaned forward, forgetting her pain entirely. It is in my safe, I said. At my house. $250,000 in $100 bills. It is my life savings, Lucas. Everything I have worked for since your mother died. Lucas started crying again, tears of relief streaming down his face. Dad, you did that for us. I looked at him, and for a moment I almost couldn't go through with it. I almost told him the truth right there. But I saw Tiffany. I saw the greed that lit up her face like a neon sign. She wasn't looking at Lucas. She was looking at me, imagining the stacks of green paper. We have to go get it, Tiffany said. She threw the covers off. She swung her legs out of bed. Can you move? I asked, feigning concern. Is it safe I have to? She said, gritting her teeth. For the baby. I mean for Lucas. I have to be strong. She stood up. She swayed a little just for effect, and Lucas rushed to support her. But I saw the strength in her legs. I saw the energy of a predator who smells blood. Go start the car, Lucas, she ordered. I will just grab my bag. Lucas ran out of the room. Tiffany grabbed the orange Hermes bag from the chair. She clutched it tight. Thank you, Jerry, she said, giving me a smile that didn't reach her eyes. You are a good man. I am a careful man, I corrected her. I turned and walked out to my car. My heart was pounding against my ribs like a sledgehammer. The trap was set. The bait was taken. Now I just had to get them to my house before she realized that the only thing waiting for her in my safe was a pair of handcuffs. I got into the driver's seat and texted Kowalski one word. Coming. I watched in the rearview mirror as Lucas helped Tiffany into their car. She didn't look like a dying woman anymore. She looked like a woman who had just won the lottery. But as I put the car in gear and pulled out onto the snowy street, I knew that her luck had just run out. The drive to my house would take 20 minutes. 20 minutes to end the charade. 20 minutes to break my son's heart to save his life. I gripped the wheel and drove into the darkness, leading the wolf right to the door. The drive to my house was a silent blur of tension and greed. I drove with the steady hands of a man who knows the destination, while in the rearview mirror I watched a miracle unfold. Tiffany, the woman who had been at death's door less than an hour ago, was sitting upright in the back seat. She was checking her phone constantly, her thumbs flying across the screen, likely confirming the flight or checking offshore account balances. The groans of pain had ceased. The theatrical gasping was gone. It was amazing what the promise of $250,000 could do for the human constitution. It was the most effective medicine in the world, far potent than any chemotherapy. When we pulled into my driveway, the house stood dark and imposing against the snowy backdrop. It looked like a fortress, and tonight it would serve as one. I unlocked the front door and disarmed the security system, the beep echoing loudly in the foyer. Come on, Lucas urged, practically pushing me inside. We are running out of time, Dad. The pilot said he needs wheels up in 3 hours. I know, I said, hanging up my coat slowly. I am moving as fast as an old man can. We walked into my study. It is a room lined with mahogany bookshelves and filled with the scent of old paper and pipe tobacco. It was my sanctuary. In the corner behind a heavy oak desk sat the large steel floor safe. It was an antique, heavy and impenetrable, the kind they don't make anymore. Tiffany walked into the room and stopped in the center of the rug. Her eyes went straight to the safe. She didn't look at the family photos on the wall. She didn't look at the books. She looked at the steel door like a starving wolf looks at a lamb. She was vibrating with energy. She wasn't holding her stomach anymore. She wasn't leaning on Lucas. She was standing on her own 2 feet, ready to grab the prize and run. "Open it," she said. Her voice was sharp. It wasn't a request. I walked behind the desk and knelt in front of the safe. I spun the dial. Left to 32, right to 10, left to 15. The tumblers clicked into place with a heavy mechanical thud that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. I grabbed the handle and heaved the heavy door open. Inside, sitting on the metal shelf, was a black leather briefcase. It was scuffed and worn, a relic from my days in the field. But tonight, it looked like a treasure chest. I pulled it out and set it on the desk. It landed with a satisfyingly heavy thud. Tiffany took a step forward, her hand reaching out involuntarily. "Is it all there?" she asked, her eyes wide. $250,000, I lied, patting the leather lid. "In non-sequential bills." "Just like you asked." "Thank you, Jerry," she breathed, reaching for the handle. "We have to go." Lucas grabbed the bag. "Wait," I said. My hand clamped down on the briefcase, holding it firm against the desk. Tiffany froze. Her hand was inches from mine. She looked up, and for the first time I saw a flash of pure irritation break through her mask. "What is it?" she snapped. "We don't have time for a speech, Jerry. I am dying. Remember, I know I said keeping my voice calm, and that is exactly why I need to do this. I need to be sure." Sure of what? Lucas asked, stepping up beside her. "Dad, you know she is sick." "You saw her." "I saw a lot of things, Lucas," I said, looking at my son. "But I am a man of details, you know that. I spent 30 years checking facts, and before I hand over my entire life savings, before I let you get on a plane to a foreign country where I can't protect you, I need one final reassurance." I turned my gaze to Tiffany. She was staring at me, her jaw tight. "What do you want?" she hissed. "I want to see the X-ray," I said. The room went silent. The wind howled outside the window, rattling the panes. "The X-ray," Lucas repeated, confused. "Dad, why?" "Because for $200,000. I think I deserve to see the thing that is killing my daughter-in-law," I said. "You said Dr. Roberts took scans. You said you have the medical file in that bag. Show me the tumor." Tiffany let out a short, incredulous laugh. "You are not a doctor, Jerry. You wouldn't know what you are looking at." "Try me," I said. "I investigated medical fraud for 3 decades. I have read more radiology reports than most interns. If the tumor is as big as you say, if it is stage 4, a child could see it." She hesitated. Her eyes darted to the door, then back to the briefcase. She was doing the math. She was calculating the risk. She could refuse, storm out, and try to guilt Lucas into leaving without the money. But that would mean leaving behind a fortune. Or she could bluff. She had prepared for this. She had props. She was arrogant enough to think she could fool a retired insurance adjuster. "Fine," she spat. "If it will make you write the check, fine." She reached into her orange Hermes bag. Her hand rummaged around for a moment before pulling out a large manila envelope. She tossed it onto the desk. It slid across the polished wood and stopped right in front of me. "There," she said, crossing her arms. Satisfied, I picked up the envelope. I opened the clasp slowly, deliberately, prolonging the moment. I pulled out the black film sheet. It was a standard abdominal X-ray, the white shadows of bones and organs ghostly against the black background. I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out my reading glasses. I put them on. I held the film up to the desk lamp, squinting against the light. Lucas held his breath. He looked terrified that I would see the monster inside his wife's body. Tiffany just looked annoyed, tapping her foot on the floor. I looked at the film. I looked at the dark mass in the center that was supposed to be the stomach. It was there. A large, ominous shadow. To an untrained eye, it looked like death. But I wasn't looking at the shadow. I was looking at the structure. I was looking at the bones that framed the image. I took my time. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. I let the silence stretch until it was almost unbearable. "Well," Tiffany demanded, "do you see it? Do you see why I need to go to Switzerland?" I lowered the film slowly. I took off my glasses and folded them, placing them on the desk next to the briefcase. I looked at Lucas, then I looked at Tiffany. I let a look of genuine confusion wash over my face. "This is very strange," I said softly. "What is strange?" Lucas asked, his voice trembling. "Is it inoperable?" "No," I said. "It is not that. It is just anatomy." I held the film up again, pointing a finger at the bottom of the image where the pelvic bones flared out. "You see this structure here?" I asked, tapping the white curve. "In medical science, the pelvis is the most reliable way to determine gender. A female pelvis is wide, circular, designed for childbirth. The subpubic angle is obtuse." I paused, letting the words sink in. Tiffany stopped tapping her foot. "But this pelvis," I continued, my voice hardening just a fraction. "This is narrow. It is heart-shaped. The angle is acute. It is tall and vertical." I dropped the film onto the desk. It landed with a soft slap that sounded like a gavel hitting a block. "This is a male pelvis, Tiffany," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that cut through the room like a knife. "This is an X-ray of a man. Probably a man who weighs about 200 pounds. So unless you have something very surprising to tell us about your history, this isn't your body. And that isn't your tumor." Tiffany's face went from pale to gray in a heartbeat. The arrogance vanished. The greed vanished. For the first time all night, she looked truly sick. She took a step back, her mouth opening and closing like a fish on dry land. Lucas looked at the film, then at me, then at his wife. He blinked, his brain struggling to process the impossible information. "Dad, what are you saying?" Lucas stammered. "I am saying," I replied, standing up and blocking the briefcase with my body, "that this is a fake. Just like the doctor was a fake. Just like the pills were fake. Just like she is a fake." I picked up the X-ray film and crumpled it in my fist, the plastic crinkling loudly. I threw it on the floor at her feet. "Game over, Jessica." The silence that followed the crumpled X-ray hitting the floor didn't last long. It was shattered by a sound that I will never forget. It wasn't a sob. It wasn't a plea. It was a guttural, animalistic growl that erupted from the woman standing in the center of my study. Tiffany, or Jessica, or whatever name she was using to hide her dark soul, stopped pretending. The transformation was terrifyingly instant. Her posture straightened, the fake slump of illness vanishing as if it had never existed. Her face, which had been contorted in practiced agony for weeks, smoothed out into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. She looked at the X-ray at her feet. Then she looked at me, and her eyes were burning with a hatred so intense it almost felt physical. "You senile old fool," she spat, her voice dripping with venom. "You think you know everything. You think you can trap me in your little house with your little riddles." She didn't wait for a response. She lunged. It was a desperate, violent movement. She threw herself across the desk, her manicured claws raking across the mahogany, aiming straight for the leather briefcase. She didn't care about the lie anymore. She didn't care about Lucas standing there, with his mouth open in shock. She just wanted the money. She screamed a high-pitched shriek of entitlement, grabbing the handle of the case and pulling with all her strength. "Give it to me," she yelled. "It is mine. I earned it. I put up with your pathetic son for 2 years. I earned every penny I didn't let go." I held the case firm, leaning my weight against the desk. I looked her right in the eye, watching the greed consume her. "You want it?" I asked calmly over the sound of her screaming. "You want the payout?" Here it is. I clicked the latches. The sound was loud in the small room. Snap, snap. Tiffany froze her hands, still gripping the leather. She stared at the lid, expecting to see stacks of $100 bills. She was already spending it in her head. She was already on the beach in Grand Cayman. I threw the lid open. There was no green paper inside. There were no bundles of cash. The velvet interior was empty save for two things. In the center lay a single sheet of paper with the seal of the Chicago Police Department. And next to it, a small digital voice recorder, its red light blinking steadily, a rhythmic pulse that signaled the end of her game. "What is this?" she whispered, the blood draining from her face. "It is a recording," I said, my voice steady. "It has been running since I picked you up. It recorded you asking for $200,000 for a surgery you don't need. It recorded you confirming the fake X-ray. It recorded everything. And that paper, that is an arrest warrant for Jessica Barnes." Tiffany stared at the recorder, horror dawning in her eyes. She let go of the case as if it were red-hot iron. She stumbled back, knocking over a chair. "Lucas," she gasped, turning to my son. "Lucas, do something. He is crazy. He is setting me up." But before Lucas could even move, before he could process the betrayal happening right in front of him, the room was flooded with light and noise. "Police, show me your hands." The back door to the study, which led to the garden, burst open with a crash. Detective Kowalski and 3 uniformed officers stormed in, weapons drawn, their voices booming in the confined space. They had been listening to everything from the kitchen. They had been waiting for the signal. Tiffany screamed, backing into the corner, trapped between the bookshelves and the desk. "No, you can't do this. I am sick. I am a dying woman." Kowalski didn't hesitate. He holstered his weapon and pulled out a pair of handcuffs. He marched toward her with the grim determination of a man who had read her file and knew exactly what she was capable of. "Jessica Barnes, you are under arrest for fraud, grand larceny, and identity theft," Kowalski announced, grabbing her wrist. "I am not Jessica," she shrieked, struggling against his grip. "My name is Tiffany Hawkins. I have cancer. Get your hands off me, Lucas. Help me." Lucas finally snapped out of his trance. He saw his wife being manhandled by the police. He saw the woman he loved screaming for help. His instinct, the instinct of a protector that she had exploited so well, kicked in. "Stop!" Lucas yelled, throwing himself between Kowalski and Tiffany. "Leave her alone. She is fragile. You are hurting her." "Lucas, don't," I warned, stepping around the desk. But he wasn't listening. He was hysterical. He was grabbing at the officers, trying to pull them away. "She didn't do anything," Lucas cried, tears streaming down his face. "My dad is lying. She is sick. Look at her. Bring him in." Kowalski barked to the officer at the door. The officer stepped aside and a man walked in. He was wearing an oversized windbreaker and handcuffs. His head was hung low, his posture defeated. It was Steve Miller, the fake Dr. Roberts. Lucas froze. He looked at the man who had injected his wife with saline just hours ago. "Dr. Roberts," Lucas whispered. "Tell him, Steve," I said. "Tell him who you are." Steve looked up. He looked at Tiffany, who was glaring at him with pure murder in her eyes. He flinched, but he spoke. "I am not a doctor, man," Steve mumbled, his voice shaking. "I am an actor. She hired me. She wrote the script. There is no cancer. It was all a show." "Liar!" Tiffany screamed, lunging at Steve, but Kowalski held her back. "He is lying." They paid him to say that. Lucas looked from Steve to Tiffany. His world was crumbling. The foundation of his reality was cracking, but he still couldn't let go. He couldn't accept that the love of his life was a monster. He turned to Tiffany, his hands reaching out to cup her face. "Baby, tell them," he pleaded, his voice breaking. "Tell them it is not true. Show them the scars. Show them the medical records. I know you are sick. I have seen you suffer. Please, Tiffany, just tell the truth." He tried to hug her. He tried to pull her into his arms to shield her from the accusations, and that was when she delivered the final blow. Tiffany didn't melt into his embrace. She didn't cry. She looked at him with a sneer of absolute disgust. She shoved him, hard. Her hands slammed into his chest with surprising strength, sending him stumbling back against the desk. "Get off me," she yelled, her voice raw and ugly. "You pathetic idiot! Look at you! You are so desperate to be a hero, and you are just a joke!" Lucas stared at her, stunned. "Tiffany." "There is no Tiffany," she spat, straining against the handcuffs. "God, you were easy. I have played blind men who saw more than you. I have played dead men who had more life than you. You were just a bank account, Lucas. A boring, empty, pathetic bank account, and you couldn't even get that right." Her words hit him harder than any physical blow. He stood there gasping for air as the realization finally pierced his heart. The woman he had robbed for the woman he was ready to die for was looking at him like he was garbage. You don't love me," Lucas whispered. "Love you." She laughed, a harsh barking sound. "I couldn't stand you. Every time you touched me, I wanted to vomit. That is why I was always sick, you moron, so I wouldn't have to sleep with you. You were just a pawn, a stupid, useful little pawn, and now you are nothing." Kowalski had heard enough. "Get her out of here," he ordered. The officers dragged her toward the door. She kicked and screamed, cursing me, cursing Lucas, cursing the world. She didn't look like an angel anymore. She looked like a demon being dragged back to hell. "I will get you, Jerry," she screamed over her shoulder as they hauled her out into the snow. "I will sue you. I will take everything." And then she was gone. The front door slammed shut. The flashing blue lights from the cruisers outside danced across the walls of the study, illuminating the wreckage of my family. Steve was let out quietly behind her, his head down. Kowalski stayed for a moment, looking at me. He nodded once, a silent acknowledgement of a job finished, and then he left too. The room went quiet. The only sound was the wind howling outside and the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. Lucas didn't move. He stood by the desk, staring at the spot where she had been standing. Then slowly, like a building collapsing in slow motion, his legs gave out. He slid down the front of the desk until he hit the floor. He sat there, his legs sprawled out, his hands resting limply in his lap. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. He just stared at nothing. The silence in the room was heavy, suffocating. It was the silence of a man who has lost everything he believed in. I stood there, clutching the empty briefcase, watching my son break, and I knew that while we had won the war, the casualties were going to be devastating. 3 months have passed since the night the blue lights of the police cruisers painted the snow in front of my house. The winter has finally broken, giving way to the tentative pale green of early spring in Chicago. But the air down by Lake Michigan is still sharp, carrying a chill that reminds you that the cold never really leaves this city. It just retreats for a while. I sat on a weathered wooden bench, looking out over the gray water, the rhythmic sound of the waves providing a backdrop to the silence between me and my son. Lucas sat beside me. He looked different. The bruises on his face had healed long ago, fading into memory, but he carried himself with a new kind of fragility. He was thinner. His shoulders were hunched as if he expected the sky to fall on him at any moment. He wasn't the same man who had robbed a pharmacy in a panic. He was quieter now. Broken, yes, but also stripped clean of the illusions that had nearly destroyed him. We had just come from the courthouse. It had been a long, grueling morning. The district attorney had pushed hard for a custodial sentence, citing the use of a weapon and the terror he had inflicted on the pharmacist. But we had a good lawyer, and more importantly, we had the truth. We had the recordings of Tiffany screaming at him. We had the testimony of the fake doctor. We had the psychological evaluation that painted a clear picture of a man systematically dismantled by a sociopath until he didn't know up from down. The judge, a stern woman who had seen it all, looked at Lucas not as a criminal, but as a victim of coercive control. She gave him 3 years of probation and 500 hours of community service. He was a convicted felon technically, but he was a free man. Lucas picked up a stone and tossed it into the churning water. It disappeared without a splash. "I lost everything, Dad," he said quietly, his voice almost lost in the wind. "The bank took the house last week. The school board fired me the day after the arrest. My reputation is gone. And my wife, the woman I thought I knew, she is gone too." He turned to look at me and his eyes were empty. "I am 40 years old, and I am sleeping in my father's guest room. I have nothing. I am nothing." I shifted on the bench, pulling my coat tighter. I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw the pain, but I also saw something else. I saw clarity. For 2 years, he had been living in a fog of lies, dancing to a tune played by a woman who despised him. Now the music had stopped. "You are wrong," I said firmly. "You didn't lose everything. You lost the things that were killing you." Lucas shook his head, a bitter smile touching his lips. "That house was my dream. That marriage was my life. That house was a stage," I corrected him. "And that marriage was a con. You were in love with a ghost, Lucas. You were in love with a character played by a woman named Jessica Barnes. You didn't lose a wife. You survived a predator. Most men don't survive her. Remember Thomas Reed in Ohio? He didn't make it to 40. Remember the man in Texas? He is still missing. You are sitting here breathing the air, watching the waves. That is not nothing. That is a miracle." Lucas looked down at his hands. "I feel so stupid," he whispered. "How could I not see it? How could I let her manipulate me like that? Because you have a good heart," I said, placing a hand on his shoulder. "And predators like her feast on good hearts. They look for empathy, for generosity, for the need to be a hero. She weaponized your best qualities against you. That doesn't make you stupid. It makes you human. But now you know. You have scars now, and scars are just skin that is tougher than it used to be." He looked at me, then tears swimming in his eyes. The gratitude I saw there was real this time. It wasn't the desperate, frantic gratitude of the night of the robbery. It was deep and quiet. "Thank you, Dad," he choked out. "For saying no, for not giving me the money, for catching her. You saved my life." I squeezed his shoulder. "I would do it again," I said. 1,000 times. We sat there for a long time, watching the sun begin to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of purple and bruised orange. It wasn't a happy ending in the traditional sense. There was no lottery win. There was no wedding. There was just a father and a son starting over from zero. But as I looked at Lucas, I knew he was going to be okay. He would rebuild. He would find a job. Maybe one day he would even find love again, real love, the kind that doesn't ask for a ransom. As I walked back to the car, leaving Lucas to have a moment alone with his thoughts, I thought about all the people out there who might be in his shoes. People who are giving everything they have to someone who takes without mercy. People who are ignoring the little voice in their gut that says something is wrong. Family is supposed to be our safe harbor. It is supposed to be the place where we are loved for who we are, not for what we can provide. But sometimes the people we share blood with, or the people we share a bed with, are the ones holding the knife. We are taught that love means sacrifice. We are taught that saying no is selfish. But I am here to tell you that sometimes saying no is the ultimate act of love. It is the wall you build to protect yourself and the people you care about from destruction. Don't let your desire to be a good person blind you to the reality of bad behavior. Trust your gut. If the story doesn't add up, if the emergencies never end, if the demands for money never stop, take a step back. Look at the X-ray. Check the facts. Because the truth might hurt, but a lie can kill you. I want to hear from you. Have you ever felt used by someone you loved? Have you ever had to make the hard choice to cut someone off to save yourself? Tell me your story in the comments below. Let's support each other, because no one should have to walk through that darkness alone. Here is the biggest lesson I learned from this nightmare. Trust is not a renewable resource. It must be earned, verified, and protected. When someone demands your blind trust while refusing to give you transparency that is not a relationship, that is a robbery in progress. My son thought he was being a hero by blindly believing his wife, but true heroism requires the courage to ask the hard questions. We often think that love means never having to verify the truth, but in reality, truth is the only foundation upon which real love can stand. Without it, you are just building a castle on a sinkhole. If this story resonated with you, if it made you think about your own boundaries, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps me share these stories with more people who might need to hear them. And if you are going through something similar, remember you are stronger than you think, and the truth will always set you free, even if it hurts at first. Stay safe, stay skeptical, and love yourself enough to demand the truth. Until next time.